So if people can indicate that.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, we can begin, colleagues. Yes, good afternoon, everyone, colleagues, mentors, professors, and our special guests, my fellow early career researchers. Welcome to the South African Education Research Association, that is SAERA's 2022 Early Career Researchers Online Workshop. Our theme this year, as you have seen, is from a lot. Our theme is from a long. What I'm going to request, colleagues, is that please mute your mics, please, if all possible, so that one speaker can speak at a time. So as I was saying, the theme for this year is from a long PhD to a short article. And it's truly a timely topic for most of us. And I would say probably for all of us today. My name is Mphoentle Modise, and I am the ECR rep in the SAERA Executive Committee. I took over from Thomas Salmon. I think it's important to mention Thomas' name because some of you may have interacted with him in the previous years with all the ECR activities in the SAERA programs. So yes, please introduce yourselves in the chat, say who you are, what you do, which institution or organization you work for, and especially which country you're coming from, because I know, as Prof Michael has already mentioned, we've got colleagues that start from countries like Lesotho, Kenya, Mauritius.
I've already created a branch.
Can somebody please help us mute those people who are not able to mute themselves? Luciano, I am trusting you to do that for us. I know Prof Maureen was the major issue that she raised, but here we are. So I also want to, yes, so please use the chat to interact with everybody. I also want to acknowledge the SAERA president, Professor Maureen Robinson, my mentor, who is here among us, and also some of the SAERA executive committee members who are also here. We appreciate your support and we really acknowledge the time that you took to join us today. Now, colleagues, let me introduce our facilitator, Prof Michael Samuel. My other mentor. If you are me, you are really blessed. I mean, I'm, rubbing shoulders with the big people. So Prof Michael is actually a professor in the School of Education at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And he's currently involved in designing and supporting postgraduate studies and mentoring capacity development of supervisors in a range of contexts, nationally and across the continent. His research interests include higher education studies, curriculum development, and professional development. His books, Changing Patterns of Teacher Education in South Africa and Continuity, Complexity, and Change, Teacher Education in Mauritius, explores the challenges of national and international reform initiatives in teacher education policy development. He's got another book that is entitled Disrupting Higher Education Curriculum, Undoing Cognitive Complexity and Change. Undoing Cognitive Damage, which then explores options for imaginative curriculum development. And his work has hugely impacted me, Prof. I'm really glad that I've bought one of your tools, the research wheel. I told you about it, and it helped me tremendously in my PhD and my master's degree journey. So thank you so much for your support, and I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Paul. And I'm really, on behalf of the SAERA executive as well, say well done to the early career academics, early career researchers, that we have managed to develop a kind of synergy about the interest of early career researchers at a particular stage of their development, and we are bringing that agenda into the organization itself. I need to just make some housekeeping rules. I know that many of you, I can mute you, but then if I do mute everybody, my presenters also will get muted in this particular process. So let's just be aware that if you are part of this conversation, that you are having your microphones muted, and if you wish to ask a question, we have a dedicated space for that particular issue to for that space on the program for us to be able to engage with the process of hearing your voice. But during the presentation, I'd like you to pay attention to the three early career researchers who all have recently engaged with their PhD studies, and they have already developed a sense of what it means to publish, and they're going to be sharing with you their reflections on that particular process. So first, we're going to listen to Carmelita Jacobs, and maybe I should say doctor in all of these introductions. Carmelita comes from the Stellenbosch University, and she is in the Faculty of Education, and she's the recipient of the Andrew Mellon Fellowship and for early career researchers, which she held for 2015 to 2018. And she completed a PhD in 2019. And her research interests are in educational psychology, parental support, parental education support, adolescent identity formation, resilience, inclusive education, and family school partnerships. So welcome, Carmelita, and thank you for your participation. I'm going to introduce all the speakers, and then we'll go seamlessly through each of the presentations, each one having 20 minutes, and then we'll hold a question and answer session. If you would like to ask any questions, I'll try simultaneously to be looking at the chat room, but you may also ask the questions verbally. The second speaker is Bridget Horner, and Bridget comes from the School of Built Environment and Development at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She's a doctoral student who graduated in 2021 and focuses on spatiality issues. She is an architect, and her research is on looking at the design and the spatiality of higher education space. In terms of her own work, she's looked at the issue of using alternative methodologies, visual methodologies in data production and analysis strategies. Paul is our early career research representative on the executive of SAERA, and she comes from UNISA, and Paul is a lecturer in the Department of Curriculum Studies and Instructional Studies at UNISA. Her focus is on ODL, open distance learning, e-learning, faculty support, academic development, academic professional development, technology integration. So and she has published already from her PhD, and she's going to be sharing her experiences with you. So with that, I'm going to now share the screen of Carmelita's presentation. And yeah, I'm going to open up Carmelita's presentation for you. Probably a minute. Let me just get it on. Okay, I'm now handing over to you, Carmelita. You may go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. I saw some names that are familiar in the virtual crowd, so I just want to say hello. And yeah, so I'm Carmelita, and I'm in the Department of Educational Psychology. And yes, I don't know if I did this process that well, but I'm very happy to just share a little bit of my journey and the process that I journeyed. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so the title of my PhD was parental, just the one before. Okay, there we go. The title of my PhD was Parental Educational Support for Adolescents in Single Mother Families of a Low-Income Community. So I put out some of the keywords there. So the focus was on how do parents support their children's journey, and then focusing specifically on how do parents support adolescents, and then more specifically, how does the single mom support adolescents educational journey. And the goal was really to disrupt some traditional ideas, and therefore I used theory, aspects of feminist theory, aspects of Bourdieu's ideas of cultural capital, and also a concept called community cultural wealth, and used these frameworks to explore the often non-traditional, informal ways that single parents from low-income communities do support their adolescents, primarily because there is a strong discourse around uninvolved parents, parents that do not care, and these are often parents that don't show up in traditional ways, like going to parent meetings, being on the soccer field, coming to or contact with, or continuous contact with teachers, or fundraising is often a big one. And so the goal was really to explore and to disrupt these traditional notions. So I made use of a multiple case study where I interviewed and engaged with 6 single mother families, very much using a working within a social constructivist paradigm, believing that there are multiple stories and multiple realities, and to really grow knowledge, we need to go to the context and understand the meaning that people make. So using a qualitative research approach, I then had individual interviews with the mom, with the adolescents. We also had a focus group, and then also speaking to anyone else. So case study design often allows one to approach different sources of data. And then the findings were, all the data was analyzed versus using thematic content analysis. Okay, in the next slide, I use some of my creative skills. I'm not very good at drawing, but I love color. And so some of my findings was that even though they are not able to be involved in the traditional ways, there were many there were many examples of how were supporting the adolescents, and these were in the forms of emotional capital. Previous slide.
I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to mute people as well. Sorry, I'm sorry about that, Carmelita.
No, that's okay. So examples of emotional capital, examples of aspirational capital. Moms would say, look at me, look how I've struggled. You need to be different, you need to work hard, achieve your education. And so really investing in aspirational capital towards the success of their children, resilience capital, spirituality as capital, and then really community wealth, drawing on many resources in the community, neighbors, extended family members, teachers, and knowing that a family is not only our idea of the nuclear family, but that families are systemic, and we need to take this into consideration when we're considering.
Sorry, may I just interrupt? I'm just noting that many people are actually still have their microphones on. So I'm sorry, Carmelita, to interrupt you, but may I ask again if we could all have our audios muted so that it allows the speaker to continue. Apologize for that. Go ahead, Carmelita.
That's okay. I'm talking to my nerves. Thanks. So a lot of the findings spoke to identifying these different ways that support does play out. So the three articles that have come from my PhD thus far have really focused on the findings of the study. And I am still brainstorming, in which other parts of the study can actually be published. So with the next slide, you will notice, you will see that the first article, I tried to be good, and while I was waiting for the examiners to examine my thesis, I started working on the first article, and it focused very much on talking about these different types of capital that were evident using the theoretical framework of community cultural wealth. And this article I wrote with my supervisor, who also has special interests in parent support and in feminist theory as well. So the focus was on the findings of my study related. So that was the first article. The second article on the next slide also looked at findings from the study, but these were findings. So the findings included aspects of how parents support. It included aspects of what adolescents' needs were, and it also included aspects of what parents' needs are. And from the stories of the adolescents, it was evident that the narrative of the present father was not always what these adolescents needed. And not many of them, but there were some of the participants that said it would be better for our family if the father was not there. So I had a discussion with my colleague who did his research in understandings of fatherhood in South Africa. He made use of queer theory, and he made use of a literature perspectives. But I think his knowledge of those notions of fatherhood really contributed to the theoretical framework that I had already had. And therefore we were then able to use the findings from the adolescents and what they shared about the experiences of abuse, of neglect, of family violence, and analyze those findings then through this expanded theoretical framework. Yes, and that was lovely. And that article was published last year. So that was the second article. In the next slide, you'll see my third article. I again focused on the findings, and this time analyzing it through the lens of attachment theory and the importance of a mother-child bond, and how this can contribute to the development of emotional capital. Emotions are often assumed as naturally part of a mom's job, but sometimes sometimes moms are agentic in the way in which they activate certain resources, and thus they do, and thus I argue in the article they do through investing and building emotional capital. So this, I was now being brave. It was going to be the first article that I'm the single author, and I reached out to one of our professors in the faculty, and I really just took a chance because everyone's really busy, and I said, if you have time, will you have a look at this article? And he was very generous with his time, and he sat with me and we talked through it, and his contributions really enhanced the article. And then I submitted the article to a journal. It went through a review process, and then after the second review, I made changes, and after the second review process, they then rejected the article. And then last year, October, I submitted it to a new journal, and it's been with this journal for a year now. And I'm really considering whether I should take the article back and submit it somewhere else. But yeah, not feeling that confident now about writing on my own. Yes, I've spoke to that. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So like I've said, I worked on that first article while I was waiting for the examiner's feedback, and that really made a difference. The second article was written with a colleague. I think something that really inspired me, because when I was in the position of finishing my PhD, I had no idea how one, really publishes from an article. And I had a mentor at that time, and he told me to look at a student's work, and she had managed to publish 8 articles. And I went and looked at it, and I really saw how she was able to report on small aspects of her study. And that inspired me to look at my study and draw out themes on which I could then publish. My next journey, I would like to do to use the literature review that I did in my PhD, and to expand on it. So drawing in newer literature, really understanding this concept of community cultural wealth, understanding what other names it's known by, how it has been used, especially within marginalized, disadvantaged communities, and then what it could mean within the South African context, and what it could mean for building family school partnerships. So that's something that I'm very interested in. And then I'm really trying to brainstorm what my next project will be. I think it will still be in this area, but I'm not exactly sure about all the aspects to it. I think I've been a little bit naughty this year because I've really been working on a few different things. I'm involved in a project with inclusive education, and I also worked on a collaborative autoethnography with women in academia, and these were really fun. But I realized that it is important to have a specific research interest or research area. I'm finding that hard, and I'm finding I feel a lot of pressure to decide on that specific path. But I'm also allowing myself a little bit of grace as an early career researcher. I think it's okay to take a bit of time and yeah, find your way in the forest that is research. Yeah, I'm 5 minutes short of my 20 minutes. Since I can't be here later on, if anybody does have a question at this point, I'm happy to take it.
All right. Carmelita, thank you very much. So I think you are emphasizing the different stages of the development of an early career researcher, and of you commenting about writing during the examination process, writing with others, writing about different aspects of your findings, and then also learning from the rejection processes. So and finding a focus. I like you finding your way in the forest of being a novice academic or a new career researcher, early career researcher. So Carmelita, opened it up for 5 minutes to be able to see if there are questions. This is the opportunity where you can unmute and ask a question or raise your hand. That if anything you would like to ask. And I hope I will be able to see all of you and if you
You can close the presentation, Prof.
All right, okay. Nitsiki, you may go ahead with your question, unmute.
Thank you. Thanks, Carmelita. That was very interesting. I mean, I wanted to speak to you about your journey of publishing on your own, and you know, the challenges thereof. Particularly speaking to the journal that you chose to publish in, because I mean, it's not so much, you know, the fact that you published alone. You already had 2 articles that were published, which means that you can. You probably have others as well, but I mean, I find that the finding the journal that speaks to what you want to publish is a journey in itself. You know, you may be rejected outright in one journal, and the next one, you may your article, your manuscript can be accepted without corrections if it's the right journal. But sometimes it's about context. So if you're trying to publish what is relevant to South Africans in a different country, they may not be as receptive, you know, because they cannot relate to what you are trying to present. So I don't think that we always have to be chasing, you know, those international journals when local is going to work, you know, for your work. And
do you want to take 2 questions and then respond, or would you like to respond directly?
I'll just respond quickly to say the article is currently with a South African journal. And the other thing I wanted to say was my prof said that with my first article, it was actually quickly accepted. It wasn't long. And she said that was actually to my detriment because it's not the norm. So I am trying to be patient in the process.
Sure. Of course, it does signal whether journals have journal editors as well have an obligation to keep people informed about what's the state of the review process, because knowing it from the back end, it would be useful to say, yes, we're waiting for further reviews, it's going out, or some kind of engagement with the editor as well is something that we could use as a writer. Please, could you give me an update on the status of my article? Malema, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Prof. Thank you, Dr. Carmelita. I just wanted to ask that, you know, pursuing a PhD, having classes, having to publish, all of this can be quite intimidating for an early career researcher. But I just wanted to know, what are some of the support networks or structures or platforms that you relied on within the academic as well as, you know, within the social environment that may have made this journey for you not easy, but, you know, a journey that you can travel?
Thanks, Malema. Carmelita.
If I'm understanding your question correctly, it's something that I tell my students that I also try to implement, is saying hello to your thesis every day. So even if you're just reading something or writing one paragraph or making random notes, to still always stay connected to what you're doing. And I think after I worked on my PhD for 5 years, and even in the 5th year, I was still enjoying what I was reading. And I think that was a good sign that I'd chose the right topic. So that is also important. What resources did I draw on? I think being connected to others who are also on the journey. So other early career researchers, that helped a lot. Having somebody who is willing to be a critical reader and exchange ideas and thoughts with you, whom you can use as a sounding board, that also played a very big role. And I did try my best to go to all the workshops. So what was also useful is that when I was in a section of my thesis, so when I was in the data analysis section, to then go to a workshop or a workshop where they were talking about that section, and it enhanced my process when I was in the process. It's very difficult to go to a workshop on data analysis, but you're still in your literature review phase. It was much more valuable to actually go to the workshop on data analysis when I was in that phase.
Carmelita, may I just ask you a question, because I know you may not be with us in the last QA section. So you commented also that you veered off into another direction of staff development issues or the inclusive ed project. With hindsight now, do you think that you said it allowed you an opportunity to breathe and get away from your PhD, but you would like to comment a little further on that?
I think it's also part of my nature is to not say no to opportunities, and to go through the door that is open. It served me well in my life, and so in these two projects, I became involved through the encouragement of someone else, and it wasn't my decision, but it's been fruitful, the two projects, because there will be a publication this year, or my name will be in a book for the first time. And then we've also finished the article with the group of women in academia, and that we submitted it to a journal, and they also said no, but luckily they said no from the get-go. So we're going to submit it somewhere else now. So it's two publications, and it's things that I liked and I enjoyed, which has made me a little bit confused around where I should go to on my PhD journey and that research.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a good experience, but I don't know if I should have maybe focused on this PhD journey.
All right, thank you very much, Carmelita, and I'm sure we've all benefited from hearing your possibilities of networking with mentors, with different theorists that you brought into your study at different stages, new theories to be able to enhance your findings further. So it wasn't just a literal cut and paste from your PhD into a paper, but you expanding the network as you engage with the process of establishing your identity as a particular specialist in a particular area. Thank you very much, and I hope you can stay with us as much as you can. But over to you now, Bridget.
Thank you.
Unmute,
yeah,
please.
Unmute myself, and I just want to share my screen first, and then I can start. Right. Thank you so much for that, Carmelita. I share a little bit of what you're speaking about in terms of trying to find your research area and also taking time to really figure out your way in becoming an established researcher. So afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see all these early career researchers as myself that are listening in, as well as to see some of my colleagues in the PhD cohort that are also listening in. It's nice to see some familiar faces, or at least photographs of familiar faces online. So great to see you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the translation of a PhD into paper. As Michael mentioned in the introduction, I completed my PhD in 2020, but graduated in 2021. That's the process of dealing with corrections, etc. So that makes me guess that I sit within this kind of 1 to 2 year term as an early career researcher. And I've been in academia for a very long time. So I started as a lecturer in architecture in 2012, but only really decided in 2017 to take up doing my PhD. So this is a presentation. It's essentially divided into 2 sections. The first is more reflective as I ponder on my future career as a researcher post-PhD. while the second part is addressing publications for my PhD and the rationale behind publishing what I did. So it's more, the second part is more sort of a technical unpacking of how my PhD is gradually being dissected into publishable parts. The first part of this presentation is also about the critical role that publications play post-PhD and my awakening to the need to become more to make a more concerted effort to establish myself as a researcher through publication. The content of this presentation is a consolidation of thoughts that have been with me for some time now, as I try to imagine my future in academia. What do I wish to be known for? Where will it take me? I really love visuals, so I'm going to use a number of images in this presentation to address the points I'd like to make regarding publishing one's research post-PhD. The first point I'd like to make is recognizing this liminal state that Carmelita has already started to allude to post-PhD. The second is establishing one's researcher identity. The third is about the value of finding a community, finding other people that think like you, that can inspire you, that could support you. And the fourth is about finding creative pathways and creating pathways to become a successful researcher. And the significance of this 5-year window will become apparent as I go through this conversation. So this idea of liminality, several uncertainties arise post the craziness of the PhD period. So I am teaching in the School of Architecture, but my PhD was within higher education. So there's these kind of career uncertainties that sit post your PhD. Where do I belong? Where is my intellectual home? The other thing that I started to question post my PhD is intellectual uncertainties as to, does my research have intellectual value and to whom? Questions also began to arise is, what was my initial motivation for completing a PhD? Was this PhD, what was it meant to do? Was it meant to cement my place in academia? Was it meant so that I could get a promotion, open up a new field, allow me to move from practice into research, or establish my credibility in practice? If the intention of completing a PhD was to establish oneself in academia, which was my case, I was already in academia, so the PhD was really meant to entrench me within the field of academia, then I knew I was facing a ticking clock. As early career researchers have essentially an expiration date of 5 years to establish themselves. After this period, doors for funding as early career researchers began to close. I began to realize that without some form of support, directional focus, I'm going to remain floating essentially in a sea of possibilities and uncertainties post-PhD. Hence this image that I've used here. In a paper that I read by an author called Skakni, and I'll include these references later on, they referred to the post or the PhD student as a liminal state with a clearly defined beginning, which is registration, and end, which is degree complete. However, the identity shift from early career researcher to established researcher is not clearly defined. It relies on having several foundational aspects in place, such as a secure job, funding, and time, something we all seem to be lacking in, and is consequently also reliant on the unpredictability of getting published and favorable reviews from colleagues in the field. The shifting identity then from early career researcher to established researcher is then less defined by myself and more so by others. So recognizing this public role in the transition from early career researcher to established researcher was an essential cognitive shift for me from becoming internally focused on my own research, and then the need then in contrast to become part of a broader community of researchers and to find alignment and association with particular journals and conferences so as to better my chances for publication opportunities. So this image is really talking about ascending that ladder from PhD student to established researcher. So who then is this community that I could align myself with? And this community may be something that you had already been part of during your PhD, or might be something that you'd still like to find or build. It could be a community of practice or an intellectual community. It could be a participation in an editorial board for a journal or as a member of a conference organizing committee. And what is this role of this community in developing me as a researcher? Was it intellectual or mentoring? And what contribution can I make to this community in intellectually or otherwise? So my community essentially was my PhD cohort, and maintaining ties with my PhD cohort and re-engaging with this post my PhD with a new identity as mentor as opposed to student was a great way to remain intellectually challenged and stimulated, but also as a means to support and provide information that the scholars that are part of this community regularly share. And it's through this network that 2 publication opportunities have arisen, one of which has been published, and the other one I found out today is going to be published. So that's great news. The next slide really talks about, so if one's path from early career researcher to established researcher is primarily dependent on the recognition of an engagement with others, how does one navigate future career trajectories, and what might influence that trajectory? The same author I referred to early on refers to researcher career trajectories being composed of 3 interwoven work strands: the intellectual, the networking, and the institutional strand. And these strands grow and become consolidated as the research matures. So the intellectual strand is referring to early career researchers developing research expertise through their past and current projects, the formation of a research area, a niche area, whether that could be theoretical, methodological, or disciplinary, and the resulting artifacts, such as peer-reviewed papers, conference papers that are produced. The networking strand refers to developing academic networks that could be local, national, and international, having engagement with supervisors, mentors, line managers. And these authors talk about how opportunity for collaboration or actively seeking opportunities for collaboration are necessary. Otherwise, you tend to isolate yourself and limit the opportunities for research publications. The last one refers to institutional strand, and this refers to formal affiliations, such as being employed within a specific institution, as well as scholarly or academic networks. Institutional resources that you might have access to, such as support from supervisor, access to career development initiatives or grants. And the reality is that a lot of students, people in academia post-PhD tend to be weakly embedded institutionally and may not have access to as many resources that most established researchers have. I'm still trying to figure out my way around these 3 different networks: intellectual, networking, and institutional, and how best to position myself with regards to these interwoven strands so that my potential, at least for publication, is better placed. Where this may lead for now still is a bit hazy. So in terms of my PhD, the title is called Mobilizing Spatial Knowing, Students in Higher Education Spaces. And the study suggests that students' future aspirations for life outside of campus was very much entangled in their past, that they bring with them when they come into higher education, and their present experiences of campus spaces. Informal campus spaces play an essential role in students belonging in higher education and in their becoming out of higher education. And the study employed visual methods such as photography to capture students in spaces that were meaningful to them on campus. It was this methodological aspect of my thesis that I thought could become my research niche, possibly secondary to the practice aspect, which was about space. So I'm an architect, so a lot of what we tend to talk about is space and making spaces. And secondary even to the context of higher education, which was also an aspect of this thesis. So I really thought the methodological side of it would be my focus in terms of my research niche. So how did the identification of this research niche drive the choices I made in terms of publication, in terms of what I published and where I published and why? So the first opportunity to go public with my PhD was an international sociology conference that was held virtually. It was held 8 months late than initially intended because of COVID. It's essentially the pandemic and the global shutdown meant that it had to shift online. And I actively sought out this conference and its visual sociology research committee, as I'd been made aware of this existence of this research committee by a board member who I'd been in contact with during my PhD when I was trying to find out more things around utilizing visual methodologies. And I responded to a call sent by this research committee and prepared an abstract for it. The abstract was accepted and then prepared a paper. The presentation for this conference and the short paper that I delivered for it drew from my methodology chapter. So the first publication there that you see is essentially a conference proceedings, and drew both from methodology chapter as well as from my analysis of visual and textual data using critical discourse analysis and presentational analysis. So the paper itself hasn't actually been published, only the abstract, which was part of the conference proceedings. And I think this was a little bit of a short oversight on my side of not actually thinking about what do I do with this paper post the conference, because the conference itself didn't have any publications arising from it. And essentially I'm sitting with a paper now that I need to really think about where do I take it, what do I do with it. The second and fourth publication opportunity arose through my affiliation with the PhD higher education cohort, wherein researchers and supervisors shared information about possible publication opportunities. And the second publication drew from my thesis argument regarding the importance of physical campus space for students when teaching and learning went online during the COVID pandemic. So it was really about drawing from the key essence and ideas around my thesis, but it wasn't taking a specific part of my thesis. It was taking the overall idea. I even used different theories within this book chapter. The fourth paper has just, as I said, has just been accepted by a journal. And this one draws directly from my descriptive analysis in the thesis. And it takes a concept that I was working with, the idea of belonging and becoming, and it's then translated that into a paper. So both publications 2 and the one to become a new publication 4 are in the field of higher education. The third publication is in a local architectural journal, of which 3 are published annually. And this publication is really for practicing architects. So, and these architects are more interested in exciting visuals than in lengthy academic arguments. So tailoring this publication was to extract a part of my thesis that dealt more specifically with space, which was more than relevant to the architectural community. So I was looking at my study on students' imaginative mapping of campus spaces. And the reason why I decided to publish within this journal was that it served as a means, firstly, for my architectural community to acknowledge my PhD. And for me, it was an opportunity to illustrate how my research might be useful in practice. Specifically thinking about campus spaces designed from the perspective of student rather than the architect, which tends to be norm in architectural publications. It's normally the architect's voice that comes to the fore, not who they're designing for. As I mentioned earlier, even though I was interested in writing more about the methodological contribution of my research, I have not actively sought out further publications or conference opportunities other than the first conference in 2021. And also I'm starting to realize that selecting passing opportunities rather than actively searching out publication opportunities have meant that my research publications are being led rather than me leading the directions my publications should take. So I'm feeling a little bit like I'm really only taking advantage of opportunistic publishing, not actively driving what I want to be known for and in the areas I would like to publish. And this kind of bothers me a little bit. And I would like to be able to change this and take more responsibility for actively driving my identity shift from early career researcher to established researcher. And that's me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Bridget. You can stop share. I take it that you're happy to remain to keep your questions to the end, but just to note that Bridget is alerting us to the idea of how do we identify the what kind of identity do we wish to establish post your PhD, and how the PhD journey itself, not necessarily only its propositional content, but also the learnings that happened alongside the way equally could become publishable aspects of one's post-PhD journey. So with that, I'm going to go to Mpho, who's going to give you her presentation on from a long PhD to a short article. Over to you, Mpho.
Thank you, Prof. Michael. Thank you so much, Carmelita and Bridget, for sharing your journeys with us. You'll see that, you know, our journeys actually have some similarities somewhere along the line. My name is Mphoentle again, as I've already mentioned, and I'm a lecturer in the Department of Curriculum and Instructional Studies. Good afternoon again, colleagues. So my topic was entitled Academic Professional Development and Support of Academics for Digital Transformation in African Large-Scale Open and Distance Education Institutions. And the two mega universities that I looked at was the University of South Africa and the National Open University of Nigeria. As you'd see with their numbers, their student numbers, they are really truly the Africa's two largest ODL. And I had two supervisors. I had Prof van der Berg from UNISA and Prof Olaf Sauerkrachter from University of Oldenburg in Germany. Although I completed my PhD in April, but I graduated in July. So it's still a little bit fresh for me. I'm still in celebratory mode. The purpose of this study was not to compare the two institutions, but rather to get a collective view of how the digital transformations are happening within this context. And I just want to quickly mention that I also used multiple case study. I think it's Carmelita who also did the same. And I used systematic review, specifically the configurative systematic review. And I also used interviews. I used document analysis where I looked at the e-learning policies of these two universities. With interviews, you'll see that I had 20 participants from both universities. So far, I have produced 3 articles that have been submitted for peer review in different journals. The first one I co-authored with the first 2 articles rather, I co-authored them with my supervisors. I think Amelia spoke about co-authoring. I think it's one of the strategies that I think works well, you know, to increase your articles. And this paper, the first one, I actually wrote it while I was still in the PhD. That was last year. It was presented in the UNISA UNESCO virtual conference. And I'm happy to say it actually also won the best paper prize, which was quite motivating for me and quite, empowering for me. That was also from my PhD. It is now sitting with the special issue of Progressive undergoing peer review. The second article I co-produced with Prof. Zawaki It was also presented, I presented this one in Turkey in June at the Aristotle conference. It's also been submitted to the journal, it's under peer review. And the third article, which is my first sole authored article for my PhD, also was presented at the IODL conference. It's also submitted in the Turkish Online Distance Education Journal. And the fourth one I also presented it in the virtual conference this year. I find that presenting papers at conferences builds your confidence. You get feedback from colleagues, and you take the feedback, you go back, and then you improve your paper so that it can be publishable. And that's one of my strategies. Where there's an opportunity for me to present, I do that. So this one, the extended abstract, is also published now in the Science Open platform for peer review. And I am definitely sure that I will be able to submit it to another journal at the end of this year. The other one, which is quite interesting, I think Carmelita spoke to this, it's the framework that I am currently co-authoring again with one of my supervisors. And I'm sure I can maybe do the 7th or the 8th. I don't know. Prof Michael, I am here to listen to you, to hear the tips on how to push, without self-plagiarizing myself, but to push to the next, the 7th or even the 8th article. So colleagues, yes, from a long PhD to a short article. So this, my presentation rather was also, directed by the questions, the following questions. How many articles did you produce from your article? What is the first advice you'd give to someone who's planning to write an article based on their PhD? What was helpful in a situation? What challenges did you encounter, and how you worked through those challenges? The first piece of advice, I would say, based on my experience, my personal experience, I would think it's best to write as soon as possible after you complete your qualification. It is best to write around that time while your experience and the data is, your data is still fresh in your head. You know where to find stuff in your thesis without reading the thesis from page 1 to the last. So I think when things are still fresh, it may work for other people, it may not work for other people. Or you can write during the study, which I did. In fact, like I said, my first article was presented in the conference 8 months before I completed my PhD. And so that helped me. But I think if you have that little bit extra time, or you just want to, just to step away from the thesis and do something different, maybe start drafting an article, thinking about different topics that you can write from your PhD. And my most productive time was during the transition time while I was waiting for my results after I've submitted for examination. My head was going crazy. I was praying and going back to the thesis, and I realized this is the time I could actually start, producing some articles and doing some, productive work instead of worrying about the results of the PhD examination. What type of information you can use from your thesis? You can use different, articles. You can write different articles from different data generation methods that you used. For example, I used 3 different research data collection methods. And so in my case, it means I may have definitely 3 articles from those different data sets that I have employed in my thesis or my PhD rather. Or you could use your themes for qualitative researchers. You could look at your themes and write from different themes without self-plagiarizing yourself. Please beware of self-plagiarism. It's a big thing. You can also use key findings, for those quantitative research. Look at your hypothesis and write from there. Or you can look at your chapters, look at the keywords. As you remember in the previous slides, I highlighted some of the keywords in the titles or topic of my articles that sort of looked at those specific things in my thesis that are linked to the topic, the PhD topic. And you can please, definitely, if all possible, definitely publish your framework. I have a colleague who completed her PhD in 2018. And she has a beautiful framework which I came across as I was cross-referencing and looking at other theses. And I went to her, I said, listen, I want to critique your framework in a good way. I want to write about it. Are you interested in co-authoring with me, or should I go ahead and critique it? And right now we are working on that. And she completed her PhD in 2018. She hasn't written anything about it. I think it's one of the selling point for your work. Co-authoring is quite helpful because it reduces, work allocation. You are able to have that help, especially if you co-author with your supervisors. They also know your work, the topic, and they can help direct, and improve the quality of your articles to reduce the rejection rate that we see among the journals. And the challenge is, but again, don't be shy to ask for help. I always say, please, there is no shame in asking for help. Your supervisors, your mentors, your co-workers, you can come to SAERA ECRs. If we can help, if we have the capacity, we'll definitely help. If we can't, probably we can refer you to other people. And in the same spirit of Ubuntu, I really ask that if somebody else come knocking at your door, we know the experience. Open the door and help somebody if you can. If you can't, transfer them to wherever they can help, where you think they can get the help. The challenges I experienced: fatigue and exhaustion. I was tired, and the COVID-19 pandemic didn't really help because I became overnight homeschool teacher. I have a 5-year-old, I think she was about 3 years at the time, and a student, a child who's also at university. I had to help. I've got one now who's high school. So I had to juggle all these things and still be able to do my thesis and still be able to write. One of the challenges, I think I lost interest in reading the thesis, especially after I completed it. And it was there, after reading it 100 times, I just couldn't read it anymore. So it's very helpful to look at your themes or key findings so that you don't have to read everything. That's why I said it's better when everything is still fresh in your mind, so that you focus on that theme and you see what you can extrapolate from that and write from. Yes, setting time to write, it was quite a challenge for me. But I forced myself, I pushed myself. I understand that as an early career researcher, nobody can do this for me. It is my career and it really is my responsibility. And I don't know about you, but in terms of age, oh my goodness, if you are like me, you are over 40 with a small baby and you are also doing your PhD, I don't know. It was quite a challenge for me. And, we don't have the same energy or even opportunities like the younger ones, but I really would encourage you to create your own opportunities. Don't start something and not complete it, because as for me, if I can start something and I don't complete it, it just stresses me and it adds on and it adds on. So I make sure that what I start, as far as humanly possible, I complete it. I also participated in other, I also use article writing template, which helps me to approach each article as a research project with a start and an end time. That way I'm able to focus my efforts toward, and I know that by this time I should be able to be halfway and be there with the article writing. That's a sample of the article writing template that I use. It guides me, as for example, with literature, I know that, I need plus minus 1,000 words, also depending on the journal that I'm writing for, because I've been advised that at the beginning, when you write, think of a journal and look at what they want, the type of writing style and all those kind of things. And when you write with a journal in mind, so that, at the end, there's not a lot of editing that has to be done. So this template really helps me so much, and I'm happy to share with anybody who wants. Also, to distract myself during my PhD journey, I would participate in other research projects, and I'm happy to say I was able to co-author again 3 articles last year that were published that were not part of my PhD, but because I was co-authoring with other people, we helped each other, we held each other's hands, and we assisted each other to publish. That is what I've learned helps a lot for me. In terms of the reviewers' comments for your thesis, for those who have already completed, even for those who are still busy, I think it's important to look at the comments they made, and see how you can use them to write an article. For me, one, I think, or two reviewers highly recommended that I must publish the framework that I had designed. And that's the other article that I'm working on with my co-supervisor. Colleagues, I also think that, this is your journey, this is your product, and you have to believe in it. If you don't believe in it, I don't know how you expect anybody else to believe in it. And if you don't believe in it, I think it will be quite difficult for you to even want to write on it. So take ownership. You worked very hard for this thing. I want to reiterate the importance of stepping out and asking for help. Never stay in a corner and say, I can't produce. Please come out and ask, knock until the right doors are opened. And yes, and I just want to remember that your thesis speak to a very limited number of audience, the supervisors, the reviewers, but when you produce an article, you have a bigger platform, you've got a bigger communities and wider audience to speak to share, your results, your research results. And with that, I wish you all the best and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mpho, for a very inspirational talk. If you could stop sharing your screen, just to say that you are emphasizing the range of things that one needs to be simultaneously negotiating in your personal circumstances, in your institutional circumstances, and also just simply to be able to understand how we think about this particular journey, what we aiming to do, and how we aiming to engage with this particular journey as well. I probably have a need to be able to get my presentation on, and I was probably too engrossed with everybody else's that I forgot to think about my own. But I'll be with you in half a second.
Sorry, Prof. Michael, before you talk your previous presentation, my hand is up. I don't think you saw it. Can I ask?
Yeah, I'm storing the question, but you may go ahead.
Okay, it's fine if you're saying you're storing the questions for Mpho then.
Yeah, we'll store the questions for Bridget, Mpho, and myself at the end so that we are able to talk interactively between them. Is that okay? All right. My paper is focusing on probably a more pragmatic kind of approach. The others have taken a strong conception about how does one organize the planning for the career of being an early career academic. And mine is actually being very pragmatic, to be able to say, you've got papers, you've got your PhD, how do we get papers from there? So I'm going to argue that there are, without doubt, at least 6 papers that could come out from a PhD, and I'm going to elaborate on what I consider to be those 6 papers, maybe fewer from a master's, but no doubt 6 from a PhD. I'm going to be also drawing a distinction between what does it mean to write a thesis as opposed to writing a journal article. And I think this is oftentimes a problem that most young academics, novice academics have around this particular issue. I'm going to focus on just one example of taking the research methodology section of your PhD and see how we can unpack that into a range of papers. So that number of 6 might go up to maybe 8 or 10 papers that potentially could come from your PhD. I'm going to share an exemplar of theorizing a component of the research methodology, where you can see I'm combining both a theoretical issue and a methodological issue. So here are the 6 possible papers that should come from your PhD. Now, all of us know these are the traditional conventional headings of the chapters that we usually have in a PhD. We've circled over them, we've massaged them, we've reorganized it. I don't know, an average PhD student has written every one of these chapters at least 2 or 3 times over, if not more, the different sections. Usually the background, the context, the rationale, and the critical questions is the last chapter that we go back to. After having written your conclusions, then you go back to redefining and retweaking the orientation of your PhD itself. So in fact, the introductory section is something that we need to be looking at probably the culmination of clarity about what constitutes the phenomenon. So if you look at the first row that I'm suggesting, in that is embedded a debate around a clarifying of what's the problematic and what's the phenomenon that you are wishing to engage with, and who are the beneficiaries that you think might be interested in this particular problematic. Now you can see there's 4 questions there which also ask, and why are you best positioned to be able to tell us about this particular problematic? So the first 4 questions already suggest to me a sense of a gaining of a clarity of what constitutes the thing that's going under the microscope. And that process and that journey of who's doing that looking through the microscope as well needs to be written about. And that's in fact what you are dealing with in chapter 1. But I'm suggesting if you look at it carefully, that there are actually, in fact, 4 papers embedded in chapter 1. If you tease out each of those issues to be able to ask, who's the audience? Who are you writing for? What do you think they ought to be taking from the nature of your PhD? That constitutes a whole set of what might be called a conceptual paper that is attempting to define the discipline or the field or the subject matter of your PhD. So it's a conceptual paper. The second paper is a paper reviewing what others have said about this particular phenomenon. Now, that kind of chapter is a chapter that serves the platform for how you design your instruments, how you intend to do your methodology, and it's a challenge to the existing body of knowledge as you're trying to turn away from what is the dominant worldview to offer a redirection of a new field, a new direction for this particular focus. Now, when you see journals which have the word review in, educational review, South African Review of Education, this is the interest of what they're focusing on, the turn. What's the change that is being suggested to challenge the existing body of knowledge? So when thinking about your publication from your PhD, one might ask the question, what are those turns that you are making? What are those redirections that you're signaling for a new possibility? And that's what the review journal is, the Harvard Educational Review, Harvard Review, or the Review of Education, Educational Review. So when you see the word review, that's what they're interested in, the particular journal focusing on redirections. The third one is a methodological one. And as I said, we could theorize a whole range of issues about the actual field work processes. How did you come to choose the strategy? Why? Were there alternatives? Were there suggestions that you weren't satisfied with the existing methodology? You heard Bridget commenting that her first exploration was around writing about methodology. You're not only writing about the propositions of the content or conceptual paper, but you could equally write a methodological paper. And usually this, the names of journals with the word inquiry in it tend to be interested in this, this kind of paper. Qualitative research inquiry, for example, is the name of a journal which will signal that they're interested in the issue about theorizing how we do research, whether there are alternative ways of thinking about research. There are equally conferences like the World Conference on Qualitative Research, which focus on what is the cutting edge of new methodological approaches that are being considered. So attending a conference that focuses on methodology as well, and it might be a specific methodology, I don't know, critical ethnography, feminist methodology, etc. And in that way, you're being able to target the third paper. Now, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth could be, as Mpho was suggesting, it might be 3 cases that come from your data. You interviewed 3 different institutions. You worked with 3 different broad ideas in your, or themes in your data analysis, linking to the analysis that came from the field. So in there, I'm saying 3, but it could be a lot more. In this particular section, you're paying attention to a field-driven interpretation, pushing towards an analysis and evaluation. It might take it back to, as you've done in your thesis, towards what is the framing theoretical orientation that allowed you to see and challenge the existing field, theoretical framework as seen from the specifics of your fieldwork. So you can see there's, in that section there's a 5th paper. The 6th paper is, if you were to be interviewed on BBC television, and I'm saying BBC deliberately because it has an international audience as its focus, they may ask you the question, what's your contribution to the body of knowledge? After 5 years, 4 years of your engaging with this topic, what can you now say to the world? You, the authority. And I think it's about taking ownership of understanding that new contribution that you are going to be making into the body of knowledge. Okay, but let's now look at the comparisons between writing a thesis and writing a research article. And there are significant differences. The one is writing forwards, and the other one is writing backwards. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So, for example, in a thesis, there is, as you were writing at different stages of your writing, an unfolding clarification is reported on. It evolves how chapter 1 influences chapter 2, and it progresses in that kind of unfolding clarification. In a research article is not a mystery novel. We know the conclusion already that you're trying to argue. So in fact, you're starting with, we know where I'm going to tell you where we're going. I know where I'm taking you. And that is communicated at quite upfront as to what the article is aiming to achieve. The next issue is, in a thesis, you have the latitude because of space, time, and length of pages, that you can go to different meanderings to complexify the issue, to suggest components to develop the thesis argument. In a research article, you don't have that latitude. And this generally is the biggest problem of a person writing for the first time out of their PhD. They want to tell you about their whole PhD. Instead, it needs to be a narrow, defined, selected slice, which is being explored in 10 to 15 pages. So it looks specifically on what did you learn from that slice in terms of moving forward. It's not telling us about your whole PhD. There's several other papers that you can write about your PhD. The next definition is, in an article, we have a short, precise, focused, defined, less is more principle. Whereas in a thesis, you have opportunities for exploration of different ideas. In a thesis, the aim is to generate an audience, to be able to convince people come on board, here's this wider audience, but it's usually within the conventions of the rigor of research as by the institutional conventions of your alma mater in terms of the institution you're graduating with. With an article, the audience is already defined in terms of who are the past readers. They are a specific group of people, and part of the issue of publication and writing is not only about writing, but about reading these particular journals. So if you aim to write in a particular journal, then you should be aware of who's the audience, what are their latest debates, what are the cutting edge debates that they are having. Have you subscribed to this journal? Why should you be accepted within this community of this target audience? So it's writing with a clearly defined understanding, because you can look at the past 5 editions of the journal and you'll be able to see what they write about. So in the article, there's a limited focus usually on the research methodology if you're writing about a conceptual issue. The emphasis is not to test to see whether you can do a methodological design, unless, of course, the paper is about methodology. But the focus is on the conceptual argument that you're trying to develop. So the emphasis in methodology in most articles written by novice researchers tend to be, let's see, can you please switch your microphone off? I've lost my thought, 1 minute. So if there's a limited focus, the emphasis gets redirected towards the design of the focus of what you're trying to argue. So it should reflect an acknowledgement of past articles, usually in a target journal. You should be drawing of the conventions of the referencing style, not of where you graduated from, but what is the reference styles of the particular journal that you're engaging with. And that's all captured in the notes to the contributors. That's what I mean by a thesis is writing forwards, trying to establish a particular kind of community, whereas in an article, the community already exists, and you are writing with knowing what is the argument that you're going to convince this particular audience for. Now, in terms of how they are similar, all of them, whether it's a thesis or a research article or a conference presentation or a conference proceeding, has to demonstrate going public. It's no use sitting with ideas that you don't share with others. It's about scholarship. It's about theorizing. It's about trying to assist us to make a contribution to the body of knowledge. So I want to share with you an example of writing a research methodology paper. And I'm suggesting, well, if you look at a research methodology chapter, it has a theorizing, the approach, you have a set of techniques, and here's all of those things that you do. There's an analysis process that you have undertaken. You have bolstered it with ethical issues and validity issues. Now, look at all of those boxes on the table here, and you will notice that, in fact, you could write an article on each of those particular boxes. Just on the methodology section itself, you have enough to be able to comment on, to be able to engage with a methodological paper. It could be on an ethical issue. It could be on a validity issue. It could be on what was the processes that you use for analysis, and would you use it differently? Is it changing the way in which we're doing analysis? So in a methodology paper, the range is possible, much wider. You could also talk about what's the literature on the research methodology, the methods that are being used as well, and comment on the existing body of literature, besides just a practical component. So in why to publish a literature, a methodological paper, you can see I'm listing here, and when you get this presentation, you can examine it in a little more detail. You can talk about how the data was obtained. What branch of scholarship are you aiming to engage with methodologically? How did you come to define the problem? What's the practices of research in particular conventions of certain instruments? What are the anticipated problems in the methodological process? This alone, you can see, is an attempt to be able to share with the research field ways in which your instruments, your methodologies might be replicated or adapted. So I want to just close with an exemplar of theorizing the concept of anonymity. Now, very often it is, and this is a paper that I delivered last year in the World Conference on Quality Inquiry, where I took just the phenomenon of how do we negotiate anonymity in an educational research study design. And I compared 3 different approaches to looking at anonymity, and therefore theorized whether anonymity, especially in a culture that affirms Ubuntu, might actually be problematic. So why are we masking the individuals? Who and what are we protecting in the process of acquiring and dedicating our concern with anonymity? So I'm showing in this, you could take a small example of one aspect of your methodology and elaborate it into a paper of its own. So is it 6? Is it that we talk about 6 papers? No, I think that we've got plenty more papers than just the 6 possible publications that are required for a PhD. So thank you very much. And that's my presentation. And I am now going to open up for questions on each of the presentations. And may I just open then the floor to, I will stop share and then open up for questions. Thank you.
Prof, can I ask a question quickly before
Go
I
ahead, Carmelita. Go thanks.
I said it in the chat here. So the of these ideas that you gave, they all seem, I'm thinking they seem so different, like different articles focusing on methodology, focusing on, and I'm thinking, how do they contribute to your research area, or this golden thread that one is supposed to create along your career? Does it make sense, what I'm asking?
Are you directing it directly to me, Carmelita?
Yes, please, Prof.
Okay. Can I take a few questions, and then we'll ask the panel as a whole to respond as well? Okay. Pulain, would you like to go next?
Yes, Prof. Thanks, Prof. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Pulain from CPUT in Cape Town. My question is directed to Dr. Mphoentle and to Prof also. With Dr. Mphoentle, I'm asking if you could share the framework, the resources that you shared with us on the screen, if you don't mind. And secondly, you encourage them. As somebody's background.
Would you please mute your Bonga, you.
Oh, is that it? Yeah, all right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The second question, Dr. Mphoentle advised us to co-author with our supervisors. What I would like to know, who starts the talk? Because one will be finishing his or her PhD, and she suggested that when she was in her waiting period for her examination, the results of her thesis, she started writing. Who is starting the talk that now I would like us to write a paper, or do I just write a paper and give it to the supervisors to co-author with me? And lastly, Prof suggested this plus 6 articles plus 2 that could come out of the PhD thesis. The question to Prof is the framework. Will the framework of those papers be different, or is it going to be the same framework that one has used on a thesis itself? Thank you so much, colleagues.
Okay, I take it that there's 3 questions there, and may I start with asking Mpho if you could address the issue about, we agree we will share the framework with you that Mpho engaged with, but if you could
Yes.
talk about plagiarism and who starts the talk. Mpho?
Yes, thank you so much. Was that Puleng? Puleng is my second name,
Yeah.
by the way, namesake. I actually laughed when you asked who started the conversation about co-authoring. Like I said, it's your journey. Remember, your supervisor might be a professor. He or she's already there, you know. So I think you need to initiate the conversation and go as far as what I did. Even went as far as drafting the first article, just a draft. They also contributed to the articles, but I had to start the first draft so that they can guide me and also contribute, so that when they put their names on the paper, it's what they also endorse. What is the next question, Prof? Was it about self-plagiarism?
The second question about plagiarism. What? Yeah.
Yeah, Prof, can I can I pass that one to you?
All right. I think
Yes.
the issue that Puleng is asking, if I'm understanding the question correctly, Puleng, and you can come back if I'm not. The argument that you're asking is, if you've written something in your PhD, the obligation is that if you're using it again, you can't just cut and paste from your PhD and put it into your article, because that would be regarded as self-plagiarism. You have to acknowledge where it's coming from, that it was first written into a PhD. Otherwise, if you pick up, there will be a similitude between similarity index of what exactly the original paper is indicating. Okay, Puleng, you want to clarify if I understood your question? And Ms. Goliath, I'll come to you after we've dealt with the 2 other questions that's on the table.
Yes, Prof, you've answered it correctly. Yes, you have answered it correctly.
Thank you.
To you, Puleng. Thank you.
Yeah. Bridget, would you like to ask, do we use the same framework as your PhD in articles that come out of the PhD or in the post-PhD? Bridget, your view?
I think it can vary, I guess, in terms of which journals you're working with and what the key themes are that you're addressing. So in the one article that I was writing, I was drawing directly from a theme that had come from my PhD, while others were inspired by the PhD rather than drawing directly from it. I'm not sure if I'm responding to the question correctly, but yeah.
Remember when we're saying publishing from your PhD, the PhD is a text, but you've learned a hang of a lot more than just writing the text. So therefore you could draw from the wide range of experiences of different frameworks. I think, Carmelita, you raised that question of when you wrote with your second author. Would you like to comment on that, Carmelita?
Carmelita's unfortunately to leave. She's gone.
Oh, she actually, Carmelita made the point that in the first article on fatherhood, she had to work with somebody else and deepening her understanding of the concept of fatherhood and its nature on single parenting. And therefore, she had to choose another framework. She's still the educational psychologist who did a PhD in a particular area, but in co-authoring, she was bringing another framework into bear. So it's not a technical exercise of cutting parts of your PhD and putting it into an article. It's a much more networking, engaging with what is the PhD meant for, to be developing scholarship, to develop understanding of the field. May I answer also the issue about the golden thread, or Bridget, you want to tackle this maybe? The idea of, should we stay within the same framework that you began with? Or, yeah, your views?
I think that's quite a tricky one, because even within my own PhD thesis, I straddled a whole lot of different aspects. And that's where I was trying to raise through my presentation, that I'm dealing with both space, higher education, I'm dealing with students. So there were many different areas which the PhD essentially covered. So there's many opportunities in which to publish, and whether you try and establish yourself within a particular direction, it's really up to you as a researcher as to where you take what you're exploring within your thesis.
It's also noted that most professors, if you had to ask them what was their original PhD and where they now as professors, you might do an interview with your professors and you'll find out that the area that they profess in is not directly linked to the PhD with which they began. That developed your generic skills, but in the early stages, that's where you're going to be drawing from. And it's not a single framework. Otherwise, there's a problem with your PhD if you just have one singular issue. Well, that's Michael's judgment about PhD. Paul, would you like to comment on that? Yeah.
Yes, Prof. Yes. I think it's important for early career researchers. This is quite an important discussion for us to find our niche now, at this stage, so that we can then develop it. I mean, I've seen people who go for enough ratings. The main thing is that thread, in your research profile. Your footprint, what are you talking about? How consistent are you in that field? So finding a niche at this moment is something that I think we need to do that. We need to find it as soon as possible and research and write on it. Thank you, Prof.
Ms. Goliath, you'd like to comment or question?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a master's student from Stellenbosch University, and I was just wondering whether the panel had any advice for a student wanting to pursue a PhD regarding funding opportunities and assistantships and things of that nature. Thank you.
Okay, I think part of the question was addressed by Paul, if I'm not correct, or looking at being able to engage with finding resources for PhDs and for you to this.
Yes, I think my colleagues, I think what's important is first, let's look what our universities offer. I don't know where you are, the environment you are in, but at UNISA, we receive a lot of information from the Office of the Research Directorate, where they feed us with, information about bursaries, about collaborations, even in international collaborations. Look into those. And again, online, there's a lot of information about, especially masters and PhD funding that is out there. Like I said, knock until one door is open. Information is there, you just need to know how to find it. Thank you.
In fact, there's a lot of possibilities, but very often we probably are not networking correctly with the appropriate resourcing. So the research office, your supervisor, your dean of research, or the equivalent of the departmental head about research, is all about activating the culture of research within the organization. I know we have international visitors as well in this room. There are people from Kenya, there are people from Tanzania, there are people from Mauritius. I'd like to hear your views as well. Let's hear Ayanda now.
Thank you, Prof, and good afternoon to colleagues and presenters. I want to make a comment which has helped me, directed to specifically Professor Michael. Firstly, about writing to a review session of a journal. The emphasis that you are now, looking at the literature, I've got that today. Then secondly, on the chapter moves, where you are saying that when you are writing, you're getting those approximately 6 papers that are coming from the concluding remarks, meaning that it's the so what. You have just helped me to position my 2 current drafts so that I can answer specifically to that. And then to my other colleagues, we have presented. Thank you so well. You have removed much of the glue over the eye. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not only about the end of the study that one should be engaging with, but it's definitely a component part that we can be looking at, as it was calling it the BBC interview. What's your contribution is an important part of the study. There's a question in the chat, if I may pick up on, or maybe a misunderstanding. You can draw from data in your PhD, but you have to acknowledge it. You have to say where it comes from, that it is from, that this paper draws from a wider study, the data was drawn in this particular context, here's the ethical clearance processes that were acquired in order to do the study. But you can't just cut and paste it into your study. You will have to acknowledge it. Walter, I think that was your question. If you would like to ask it in your own words, go ahead.
No, thank you, Prof. I think I'm answered. Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, further questions? SAERA, would you like to ask a question? I'm putting you on the spot.
Hi there. Yes, you are putting me on the spot. What I was pondering, and I probably would have asked you tomorrow in our session, but what are the ethical implications of changing frameworks and using different frameworks, different ways of viewing your data? Are there any ethical considerations there? Because obviously what you've sort of cited up front, what you're going to be doing has gone through ethical clearance. Are there any implications of that?
So you talk about different frameworks?
Yeah, so
in the publication process.
Yeah, so in the publication process, sort of reusing your data in different ways and conceptualizing it in different ways. Are there ethical issues with doing that?
Okay. All right, that's a question on the floor. Walter's applauding your question. Any further questions that we could ask? Walter, go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. My other question is linked to your brief reference to anonymity in research, especially academic research. Oftentimes, I've seen colleagues making reference to the institutions from which they are doing the study. And I've wondered, isn't this unethical that you are making reference to the case from which you drew your data? Are you not linking the data are you not linking your readers to your source of data?
Okay, thank you, Walter. I'll deal with that later, but is there anyone of the panel wanting to refer to this issue about changing your theoretical lens to rethink the data in new ways? Bridget or Paul?
I'll start. I don't think the changing your theoretical framework necessarily affects the ethical aspects of your thesis. Because ethics is really concerned with how you're collecting data and that you're collecting the data in an ethical manner and are responsive to the participants that you're engaging with. So I don't, my view is that wouldn't really affect the ethical process. Yeah, that would be my view on that.
Paul, your opinion and your view?
I must be honest, I have been asked personally asked to change one of the theoretical frameworks I used. And I mean, just like 2 weeks ago, and I was battling with that, and I asked one of my supervisors the same question, and Bridget, the same answer was given to me, that, and especially that the new framework that was suggested forms part of the bigger framework that I used. So I was told there is no ethical issues. So I'll stand by you, Bridget.
I also support both of your interpretations there of this issue, is that let's understand what we're doing. We produce data in an ethical way. That's the data. Now we're asking the question, what lens are we going to be using to analyze the data? So this is an analytical question, all right? If we're trying to analyze the data, for example, originally you may have even drawn the data from a particular theoretical framing, but you might realize even in the course of your analysis process that that might be not appropriate. And therefore you may want to extend your framework to what might be called an analytical framework. To be able to draw new theories to might be qualitative framework, to be able to draw new theories, look at the data. It wasn't original. Also, and
Colleagues, Prof. Michael, it seems like you are losing your network. I'm also having a similar issue this side. Your screen went blank. Bridget, it seems like Prof. Michael has made you the host now. I'm not sure Prof. Michael will come back to us.
Mphoentle, perhaps we should close because we are on time.
Yes, are we on time? Are you suggesting that we should close, Maureen?
Yeah, I think we are. We have reached our time, and I'm also losing connection, and a few people are, so it might be a good opportunity.
I was just going to bring it to a close.
Oh, okay. Hi, Michael. Glad you're back.
Yeah, I just got cut off at the moment, but I hope that we're all going to join in a electronic congratulations of the three members of the panel who put together a lot of effort to engage us. So I'm going to ask you to electronically give them your applause by saying that I think just the sheer interest in the number of people who have stayed with this particular presentation, we are very grateful for you to join us, and I'm sure Mpho, the signals that we need to do more of this kind of activity. So with that, I want to hand back then to Mpho to close the session.
It is well, Prof. Thank you so much. We've seen the responses and reaction in the chat, and thank you so much, everybody, for sticking to the end of the program. We will continue, communicating. There will be an email also communication just for you to give us feedback on, the whole process. But thank you so much. Thank you again, Maureen, my co-presenters, Bridget and Carmelita. Thank you so much. Prof. Michael, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. You can switch on your video so that we can at least get a sense of the face behind the name. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Nice
everybody.
To have you. Hi, Sam.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Nice to see you, Ayanda. Good.
Yeah.
Christy. Good.
Veronica.
Good. Hi, Veronica.
Christy.
Yeah. Good to see you.
Christy is my colleague, Prof.
Yes, Christy. Good. Yeah, nice to support your colleagues. Even
yes.
I noticed
Samuel, is it possible to have your contact email address for further questions?
Okay, Mpho, we'll put up details about the contact detail. we'll also make available the presentations.
Prof. Prof.
Luvani, yes, Luvani.
Yes, Prof.
Oh, Mbambo, go ahead.
It's Walter.
You're muted at the moment, so I can't hear you.
Actually, I'm done. I have some questions, but then I will send them directly when I get this email address.
Brilliant. Thank you. All right.
Yes,
and
Prof.
please invite us to the next workshops.
Okay, Mpho, there we go. Thank you.
This was informative.
Yes, Prof.
Thank you.
Yes, who's speaking? I cannot see you. Raise your hand, please.
It's Walter. It's Walter. It's
Walter.
Walter.
Go ahead, Walter.
You forgot to respond to my question.
Okay, about anonymity. I can respond, but I got cut off at the electricity went off at that particular point. I can respond quickly to, I say I disagree with you. That I don't think that we should be protecting anonymity. I think there's a view that I'm taking that's suggesting that we silencing the presence of particular institutions, and I'm asking whose interests are we serving by silencing people? But we've got this fetish with individualism, which is largely a Western conception that I must protect you and not allow you. Even our Poppy Act, I have a problem with personally. But yeah, don't place that on record. But Mpho, you want to come?
If I may add, Prof. Sorry, if I may quickly add. The National Open University of Nigeria is so excited about my results, research results, that they have actually invited me end of November to come and speak about the overall PhD results with them. So they want to learn, they want to know where they can improve, where they're doing well. So sometimes really it helps to reveal, you know, the organizations.
When I write up the paper, Walter, I will share it with you to be able to see. They've invited me back again this year, by the way, to come and talk at that conference to say, are our methodologies and approaches to doing research also Eurocentric and individualistic and problematic? And that's what I'm theorizing in that paper. That so, for example, I've shared with the community in that conference the idea that if I mask your face and pixel it out, I'm doing something visually ethical. But Bridget would die of horror if I took a pixel and shaded over the photographs of her participants. Or yeah, how do we conceptualize what we're trying to do in anonymity? It's not a blanket issue, but you want to have a debate with me, write to me and we can talk about it. Okay. Thank you very much, Maureen.
I want a debate with you, Prof. I'll write to you.
Yeah, too.
Challenge accepted. Challenge accepted.
Yeah, therein lies the problem. Confidentiality. Yeah. Okay. Maureen, thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Mphoentle, and everybody else. Wonderful presentation, truly, really wonderful.
Yeah, well done, team. I think it was good. Thanks, Bridget.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
I think I'm now closing the session. Okay.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Yes, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.